leadership team spent months trying to figure out what it called a communication problem. They added updates, they scheduled more meetings, they cleaned up the messaging. They probably felt responsible, proactive while they were doing it. But the people closest to the work were not asking for more communication. They were asking to be included before the decisions were made. And that is a very different problem. Once you start to see that difference, you start seeing it everywhere. A founder rewrites the offer when the real issue is that she has not understood what the client's real pain point is. A company launches a wellness initiative when the real issue is workload and constant availability. Smart people solve the wrong problem beautifully. And by the time they realize it, they may have spent real money, real time, and real relationships on the wrong answer. Welcome to Leadership Law and Lightwork. I'm Marcia Narine Weldon. This episode is sponsored by Illuminating Wisdom, where I help leaders, lawyers, founders, and high-achieving professionals build the capacity to lead, decide, and communicate under pressure. In episode 37, I use Sam Altman of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, as one example of what can happen when people no longer trust the leader or the structure around the leader to tell the truth. Today's episode picks up a related question. Once people are willing to tell the truth, what happens next? The leadership issue today is one I see all the time. Smart people move very quickly from the problem to the solution. They hear an issue and they start solving right away. They analyze fast. They make connections quickly. They want to be useful. In a lot of professional environments, that gets rewarded. The trouble is that fast problem solving can create a lot of activity around the wrong problem. And that's where design thinking can help. So this is what I'm going to talk about in the Leadership Lab. Design thinking can sound like consultant language if you've only heard the phrase used in passing. But used well, it's a practical way to keep smart people from building a polished solution to a poorly understood problem. The basic process usually moves through 5 stages: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. You start with empathy. You try to understand the person affected by the problem. Then you define the problem more precisely. Then you ideate, which means you generate possible solutions. Prototype, which means you build a rough version of something you can learn from. And then you test, so the real world can teach you what the conference room didn't. And that order matters a lot. Many teams want to skip straight to ideation because generating ideas feels productive. Some teams want to prototype immediately because building something feels like progress. And some leaders want the answer before the team has spent enough time understanding the person who has to live with that answer. And that is, again, how smart teams solve the wrong problem beautifully. One of the simplest tools in the empathy stage is the empathy map. So an empathy map helps you understand the experience of the person or the group before you decide what they need. It usually asks you to look at several areas. What are they saying? What are they doing? What might they be thinking and feeling? What are they seeing and hearing around them? Where are they experiencing pain or friction? And what are they trying to gain? So these questions sound really simple. The discipline is how you answer them. You don't fill in this map with your favorite story about the person. You don't treat one loud anecdote as the proof. You don't write down what you need the client or the employee or the customer or the member or the stakeholder to believe so that your preferred solution makes sense. You ask, how do I know that? If you have direct evidence, label it verified. If you're making an informed guess, label it assumed. And if you don't know, just label it unknown. That one practice can change the whole thing. A lot of teams discover that their most confident statements are based on habits, old data, folklore, or the perspective of people who are not actually experiencing the problem. So let me make this concrete. Imagine a leadership team that hears that employees, local teams, or people closest to the work feel disconnected from the people making the decisions. The first diagnosis is, we have a communication problem, because that sounds reasonable. So the team starts talking about more updates, more town halls, newsletters, a cleaner communication plan. Maybe they even hire somebody to create a whole new internal communication strategy. And some of that might actually help. But an empathy map may show something much more useful. Start with what the people are saying. Maybe they're saying, decisions are made without us. They may be saying, they don't know what this looks like on the ground. Or maybe, we hear about the changes after everything's already been decided. Every time we give feedback, nothing ever changes. Sound familiar? Now look at what they're doing. Maybe they're disengaging from the new initiatives. They're creating workarounds. They're attending meetings, but they don't contribute. They're waiting for the initiative to fail because that's what happened the last 3 times. Maybe they're complying on paper while continuing to operate the same old way. And that behavior matters because that tells you more than the polite answer you're going to get in the meeting. Now look at what they're thinking and feeling. Maybe they're thinking, they don't really want our input. Or this was already decided before anyone even asked us. Or If I say what I really think, they're going to label me as negative. Or maybe they're thinking leadership actually wants the buy-in, but not the actual participation. So they feel skeptical. They feel undervalued. They feel tired of being asked to implement decisions that they did not help to shape. And they feel protective of their own team because the central initiative feels disconnected from their daily reality. Now look at what they're seeing and hearing. They're hearing their peers complain privately. They see other teams ignore the initiative and face no consequences. They see senior leaders say they value their feedback, but they reward people who agree quickly. They hear polished language about collaboration that has no match to how the decisions are actually made. Now look at the pain. The pain might be that the people closest to the work are held accountable for outcomes that they didn't have any role in shaping. Maybe the pain is that they're asked for input too late, after the meaningful choices have already been made. Or they have practical knowledge that can prove the decision, but the system didn't invite that knowledge early enough. Now look at the gain. They want earlier involvement. They may want practical respect for what they know. Maybe they want to see how their feedback changed the final plan. They want fewer performative listening sessions and more evidence that their experience actually matters. So once you map all of this out honestly, the problem changes. It used to be, we need better communication. And now the better problem statement is, people closest to the work do not believe their input really matters early enough to shape the decision, engage from initiatives that they're later expected to implement. That is a much better problem to solve. So if you solve for communication alone, you're going to send more messages to people who already feel ignored. If you solve for meaningful input, you may design earlier stakeholder intervention. Maybe some pilot groups, rotating advisory teams, decision logs, a feedback loop, something that shows that people, that what they said mattered. So a better newsletter might tell people what was decided, but a better process helps people improve the decision. And that is what design thinking does at its best. It keeps a team from solving the surface problem and pushes the team to understand the human experience underneath it. So if you're listening to this and say, this sounds great in theory, but will this work with my team? I work with lawyers or executives, students, sponsors, people who want to get to the answer right away. My answer is absolutely. I've actually watched it happen for years through Law Without Walls. If you're not familiar with it, this is a program founded by Michelle DeStefano, a legal educator, author, innovation strategist, who teaches at the University of Miami and is a visiting professor at Harvard Law School. This program brings together cross-cultural, intergenerational teams of students, lawyers, business professionals, academics, coaches, sponsors from around the world. They work through an intensive 3-day sprint, basically a legal hackathon, where they use design thinking to work on real problems under a serious time pressure. So I've served as a behavioral expert, power coach, and judge in that program for years. And one of the reasons I believe it gets it and it works is that it gives smart, ambitious people a process that keeps them from solving the problem too fast. And yes, I know you're hearing lawyers and empathy. That doesn't work. But empathy is not about being sentimental. It's really about becoming more accurate. Lawyers and other professionals are trained to analyze quickly. We're trained to spot the issues, evaluate the risk, protect the clients, argue the positions, and then move toward advice. Very valuable skills. But they can also make us impatient with the earlier part of problem solving, where we have to understand somebody's experience before deciding what they need. Leaders, founders, professors, parents, we all do this. Anyone who's used to being rewarded for answers can start solving before understanding. So people are smart, they're motivated, they have little time. So the natural instinct is to jump into the idea, make it look impressive, and start building the pitch. Design thinking keeps pulling the team back to the better questions. Who is this for? What are they experiencing? What do we actually know? What are we assuming? What still needs to be tested? And this is not a delay. This is part of the work. And the same process works if you're leading yourself. So suppose you keep saying, I need a new job. And that might be true. But before treating that sentence as the full diagnosis, you can use a version of empathy mapping on yourself. Look at what you're doing. Maybe you're scrolling job postings, but you're not applying. Maybe you're avoiding a conversation with your manager. Maybe you're overworking and then calling the job the problem when the real issue might be the way the job has taken over your life. Then look at the pain. Maybe the pain is your role. It's the manager. Maybe it's the culture. Maybe it's the hours. Maybe it's a mismatch of values. Maybe your life has expanded in a way that the role has not. So once you map that out honestly, the question might change. Maybe it goes from, should I leave my job, to, can this role be redesigned in a way that protects my health, uses my strengths? Maybe it goes to, am I staying because the title looks successful from the outside? And maybe it goes to, Am I trying to make a permanent decision from a temporary state of depletion? These questions create completely different options. The practice is the same whether you lead a team or yourself. Slow down before you solve. Understand the lived experience. Separate what you know from what you assume, and define the problem honestly before you start testing solutions. That brings us to the brief, because design thinking only works if someone in the room is willing to challenge the map itself. If everyone is too polite to say, I don't think this is going to work, the total thing collapses into another polished exercise. And this is where radical candor becomes useful. So today's brief is the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. So a lot of people use the phrase radical candor now because plenty of people have probably not even read the book. You just heard about it. She has a framework built around 2 dimensions, care personally and challenge directly. Care personally means that you treat the other person as a human being, not as a role, an obstacle, a problem, a subordinate, or some container for your frustration. And challenge directly means you say what needs to be said with enough specificity that the other person or the group can actually use it. And I think this book caught on because it gave people language for something that many professionals struggle with, that uncomfortable space between being too nice to be useful and too blunt to be trusted. So there's 4 quadrants: radical candor, ruinous empathy, obnoxious aggression, and manipulative insincerity. Let's walk through them. So the first quadrant is radical candor. This is where care personally and challenge directly are both present. And this is the quadrant where feedback has the best chance of being useful. It sounds something like this. I like where this is going, and I think we need to test one assumption before we build around it. Or, I know we're short on time, but I don't think our problem statement is specific enough yet. Or maybe, I might be missing something, but I don't think the person we're designing for would actually use these. So these sentences challenge the idea without diminishing the person who said it. The thought gets tested, and the person can stay in the conversation comfortably. And that combination really matters. The second quadrant is ruinous empathy. This is where people care personally but don't challenge directly. And this is very common in professional settings, especially where people who are smart, polished, conflict avoidant, or deeply invested in being seen as supportive don't want to speak up. Sometimes they see the flaw, but they soften the concern, and then the room misses the whole thing. It sounds something like this. That's interesting. Or, I'm fine with whatever the group decides. Let's keep moving. Or, we can come back to this later. But the internal sentence might be something completely different. They're thinking, I don't really think this solves the problem. I think this empathy map is full of assumptions. I think this client is going to reject this. See, the intention is kind, but the effect may still be harmful. The room stays pleasant while the weak idea survives. In personal life, ruinous empathy looks like the friend who says, do whatever makes you happy. If you like it, I love it. When she can see that you're avoiding the conversation that would actually change something. And maybe it's the way you talk to yourself. It's fine, because admitting that it's not fine would require you to do something. That third quadrant is obnoxious aggression. This is where someone challenges directly without enough care. And this could be tricky because the critique might actually be accurate. Someone sees the flaw. They name the real issue. They may be the only person that's trying to say the true thing out loud, but the problem is the delivery. It sounds like this. This makes no sense. You are so overcomplicating this. That is not realistic. Did anyone actually think this through? So maybe there's critique and there's truth in the critique, but the delivery makes people feel smaller. And once that happens, people start editing themselves. They stop offering half-formed ideas. They become more careful, and the group actually needs them to become more useful. The fourth quadrant is manipulative insincerity. This is where there's not meaningful care and there's not direct challenge. People are managing the impressions. They say the agreeable thing in the room and say the honest critique for later. Sounds like this. Great idea. I love where this is going. And then the hallway or in the group chat or the ride home, that was never going to work. This behavior is really corrosive because the group never gets the benefit of the concern when it could still improve the outcomes. So LawWithoutWalls was a really useful place to see why this matters. I've seen this moment where a team has a polished idea, the energy is good, the pitch starts coming together, and then someone finally says, I don't think we've actually proven that this is the user's problem. That's a risky sentence. A student might be saying this in front of a lawyer that she wants to impress. A lawyer might be saying this in front of their client. A sponsor might be watching. The team's tired. This clock might be moving. No one wants to be the person who makes the room start over. But that sentence, and I've seen it happen at LawWithoutWalls and other settings, it can save the work. That's why I walk those participants through radical candor. The point was not to give them another management buzzword. The point was to show that the team's success depended on moving out of that default pattern that feels safer in the moment. In that environment, polite silence does not help. Performing the agreement does not help. And pressure, by the way, is never a good excuse for becoming careless with people. So radical candor is the move that lets the idea be challenged while the person still stays in the conversation. And that's why this book really has value. My honest assessment is that the central framework really holds up because it's simple and memorable. But I wouldn't treat it as a complete theory of communication. The missing piece is that many conversations deal with power. Culture matters, identity matters, prior relationship matters. Not everyone pays the same price for being direct, and leaders who ignore that will use this framework way too casually. And I also don't want people to think that they can walk around using this as a personality defense. If someone just says, I'm radically candid, and everyone around them looks exhausted, that's data you should use. It's not an invitation to become blunt. At its best, it's an invitation to become more respectful with the truth. That means asking 2 questions before a hard conversation. Do I care enough to say the thing that needs to be said? And have I said it in a way that gives the other person the best chance of using it? That's why this book belongs in leadership conversations. It names a real failure that shows up in teams, workplaces, and personal life. People avoid the truth, they weaponize the truth, they hide the truth, or they learn how to tell it with enough care that the work and the relationship both have a chance to get stronger together. And that brings us to the legal blind spot. Some of the most important conversations people avoid are the ones that need to happen at the beginning of a collaboration, before everyone gets excited, starts building, and assumes good intentions will be enough. Before I get to this segment, a quick reminder, the legal blind spot is general legal education and should not be taken as legal advice. I'm a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. This is not creating an attorney-client relationship. If you deal with a specific situation, please talk to a lawyer in your jurisdiction who can advise you based on the facts. And the Legal Blind Spot is brought to you by Legally Lucid, a just-in-time business protection resource for founders and business owners who want to understand where they're protected, where they might be exposed, what needs attention before this problem gets expensive. If you want more legal blind spots like this, go to legallylucid.com and join the mailing list. So today's legal blind spot is unintentional partnerships. This one matters because a lot of people think a partnership is something really formal. They assume that there's no partnership unless they signed a contract, they signed a partnership agreement, they opened a joint bank account, or they're calling themselves partners. This is an assumption that can get expensive. Picture this. You and your friend start building something together. At first, it's casual. One of you has the idea, the other has the contacts. One of you pays for the website, the other one starts talking to potential customers. You both spend time on it. You start talking about splitting whatever money comes in, but no one wants to stop and say, wait, what are we actually doing here? Because it feels awkward. It feels too early. Maybe it's a family member or your best friend. You don't want to have them sign a contract because it makes it look like you don't trust the other person. So you keep going. And then the project starts to make money, or it loses money, or one person wants out, or one person signs a contract the other person didn't know about, or someone gets injured at an event or during a service or because of something connected to the project. Now the question is not only were we collaborating, the question is, did we accidentally create a partnership? Now, in broad terms, a partnership can arise when 2 or more people carry on as co-owners of a business for profit. The exact law depends on the jurisdiction and the facts, but the broader point is that the conduct can create legal consequences even when nobody intended to create a formal business relationship. Some partnership statutes expressly provide that an association of 2 or more persons forms it even if you did not intend to form that partnership. And that's the part that people miss. So if this partnership exists, and this is a general partnership, partners might face personal liability for partnership obligations. So depending on the facts, you could be exposed even if you didn't personally cause the problem. Maybe you didn't sign the contract. You weren't even at the event. You didn't make the decision that created the risk. But if the activity is treated as a partnership business, you may still be pulled into the liability picture. And this is why this early conversation matters so much. So before you start building with someone, ask those basic questions. Are we brainstorming or are we starting a business? Are we co-owners or is this one person advising the other? Are we sharing profits or is someone being paid for services? Who owns this intellectual property? Who can sign contracts? Who's responsible for expenses? Do we need insurance? What happens if somebody gets injured or a claim is made? What happens if one of us wants out? What happens if this becomes valuable? What happens if this creates liability? These questions are going to feel uncomfortable at the beginning, especially if you're friends or family members, but they're a lot harder after money, resentment, public commitments, or legal claims enter the room. This ties back to everything we've been talking about today. Design thinking asks you not to solve too quickly. Radical candor asks you not to avoid the thing that needs to be said. And the legal blind spot asks you not to let enthusiasm disguise the fact that you might be creating obligations, ownership questions, and liability before you've even dealt with the structure. And finally, this brings us to the toolkit take. So today's toolkit take is the physiological sigh. In episode 37, the tool is about naming one true sentence you've been avoiding. This week's tool is for the moment before you say it, before you hear it, or before you realize the sentence needs to be said in the first place. Candor. When your nervous system reads anything as a threat, a conversation or a real threat, it's going to try to protect you before your best judgment has a chance to speak. So this is why the physiological sigh is really helpful. You may have heard about it through Dr. Andrew Huberman. It's one of the fastest tools I know for bringing the body down from a heightened stress response. So when you're about to challenge an idea, ask a hard question, receive feedback, name a risk, negotiate structure, your body may react before your mind has organized that sentence. Maybe your breathing gets shallow, your chest tightens up, your jaw locks, your voice speeds up. You might soften the message until it disappears. So the physiological side gives your body that reset. So here's how to do it. Take one inhale through the nose. Before you exhale, take a second smaller inhale through the nose like you're topping off your lungs. And then exhale slowly through the mouth. So it's and really do the sigh. That is one physiological sigh. Do it once. Do it 2 or 3 times. You don't have to make it dramatic. You can do it before a meeting, before giving feedback, after receiving feedback, whenever you notice yourself preparing to avoid, attack, appease, or shut down. The point is to give your body enough room so that you can choose your response. So a team can know design thinking. A leader can understand radical candor. A founder can know the legal questions she should ask. But if the body is flooded, you're still going to mishandle or avoid the situation. So before you say the hard thing, take the breath. Before you hear the hard thing, take the breath. Before you decide the person challenging you is attacking you, take the breath. Then decide what the moment actually requires. The work begins before the answer. It begins with the quality of the question, the willingness to challenge the assumption, the courage to structure the relationship, and the capacity to stay steady long enough to choose your next sentence. This episode has been brought to you by Illuminating Wisdom. If you heard anything that resonated with you, please share it with others. Please subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you next time.